The Haunted Mansion is one of the most classic and best Disney rides we all know and love today, but let's find out which one's the best. Now, the Haunted Mansion is a Disney attraction that you can find at almost every Disney resort in the world, which leads me to think which one's the best. Now, to find out which park has the best Haunted Mansion, I graded each one based on the following criteria: the exterior of the mansion, the uniqueness, the scares, and the queue. Now, before we get started, let's review what the 5 Haunted Mansions in the world are. There's the original Haunted Mansion at Disneyland Anaheim, there's another version at Walt Disney World and Tokyo Disneyland, there's Phantom Manor at Disneyland Paris, and there's Mystic Manor that can be found at Hong Kong Disneyland. Now let's get started with the exterior. Disneyland Haunted Mansion's in New Orleans Square, and because of this, it is made to look like an 1800s style New Orleans mansion. This mansion looks the cleanest on the outside compared to the others, and in fact, Walt Disney himself wanted the mansion to look so clean on the outside that he famously said, "We'll take care of the outside and let the ghosts take care of the inside." This exterior is definitely one of my favorites. Now let's hop across the country to the Haunted Mansion at Walt Disney World. The exterior of this version had to look different than California's because there was no New Orleans Square at Walt Disney World. Instead, this ride would be put in Liberty Square, so the mansion's exterior had to match the colonial theme of this area. This ride definitely fits well in Liberty Square, except it looks a lot more abandoned and creepy than Disneyland's version. Let's hop on over to Tokyo Disneyland in Japan to look at their version of this attraction. Now, the exterior of this version is pretty much identical to the Walt Disney World version, but one big difference between Tokyo's version and the other haunted mansions around the world is that it's in Fantasyland. In my opinion, the dark exterior of this ride doesn't fit very well with the happy, joyful environment in Fantasyland, which is why I think the exterior of this ride is a lot worse than Walt Disney World, even though they have the same exterior. Now let's head on over to Phantom Manor at Disneyland Paris. This mansion looks very similar to the Psycho House, and I'm just going to put a picture of the Psycho House next to Phantom Manor so you can see for yourself. Now, this building takes a major departure from Walt's original idea of keeping the outside nice, and instead this building looks creepy, abandoned, and it just looks like a haunted house. Part of the reason they did this was because they speak so many different languages in Europe, and because everyone can't understand the English signs, they wanted to make it obvious what kind of attraction was inside. The Haunted Mansion definitely has the creepiest exterior here, but it fits very well with Frontierland, the land it resides in. Now let's head over to the most recent version of the Haunted Mansion in Hong Kong. The outside of this building looks a lot like the Winchester House in California, and I don't know what it is, but just looking at the outside of this ride makes me want to go inside. This exterior looks amazing and matches the land of Mystic Point perfectly. So in terms of the exterior, Disneyland wins for me, followed by Phantom Manor and Mystic Manor, then by Magic Kingdom's Haunted Mansion, and last by a landslide is Tokyo's Haunted Mansion. I just think Tokyo's Haunted Mansion is pretty bad because of the land they put it in. I definitely think they should have used Anaheim's exterior for Tokyo's version instead of Orlando's, because Anaheim's just looks like it would fit a lot better in Fantasyland. Now let's get started with the uniqueness of this ride. So Disneyland is pretty unique because it was the first ride of its kind, and this ride is basically a tour of a retirement home for ghosts. But the only reason why this ride isn't the most unique is because it has 2 other versions in Florida and Tokyo that are very similar to this and follow the same story. However, this version has more of a walkthrough part than the others, which makes it more unique than Walt Disney World's and Tokyo Disneyland's. Next is Walt Disney World's version, and I can already say that it's very similar to Disneyland's. There are plenty of differences that make it a completely unique ride experience though. For starters, at Disneyland, the changing paintings are part of the walkthrough, while at Walt Disney World, you're on the ride during that part. Also, Walt Disney World has 3 extra rooms that can't be found at Disneyland, that being the library, the music room, and the endless staircase. Also, instead of passing little Leota on a ramp like you do at Disneyland, you're sitting on the ride when you see her at Walt Disney World. Up next, we have Tokyo Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, which is pretty much similar to Walt Disney World's version, but the real big difference is that Tokyo Disneyland didn't get the 2007 updates that Walt Disney World got, so It doesn't have the changing portraits or the endless staircase. But it does have the pre-2006 attic going for it, which I like way more than the attic at Disneyland and Walt Disney World. And it also has a Haunted Mansion holiday layover, which makes it kind of unique. The only problem is because it's almost a direct copy of Walt Disney World's mansion otherwise, it isn't as unique as the others. Now let's head on over to Phantom Manor, and Phantom Manor is pretty similar to the Haunted Mansion in California because it has an almost identical track layout as Disneyland's mansion. But instead of being a tour of our ghostly retirement home, it instead follows a story about the bride Melanie, who's being haunted by a mysterious phantom. There are plenty of rumors about who the phantom is and how the whole story goes, but if you want me to make a video going more in depth about this ride, let me know in the comments. Also, instead of the graveyard scene you would find at Anaheim, Orlando, and Tokyo, there's a ghostly frontierland replacing the graveyard, which I think is way better than the original one. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing as it supports this channel a lot. Also, let me know a video you'd like to see in the future down below in the comments, and let's get back into it. Then we have Mystic Manor, and I'm just going to say this straight away, but it's the most unique version of the Haunted Mansion in the world. First of all, instead of having the same track layout, it's totally different as it has a trackless ride system, and it goes through totally different rooms. Second of all, it isn't really a tour of a house, but more like an adventure. And finally, instead of going through the same rooms, the story is that the monkey opens up an enchanted music box that haunts the house and brings everything in it to life. This version's way different than the others, and it's still a really good ride. That's why I would say Mystic Manor's the most unique, followed by Phantom Manor, then by Disneyland, then Magic Kingdom, and finally Tokyo Disneyland. Now let's look into the scares. So Disneyland's ride isn't that scary, but it does an amazing job at being a haunted house. Also, the attic room is pretty creepy, especially because your doom buggy gets super close to the bride, who decapitated all of her husbands. Even though this version is amazing, I don't think it's the scariest. Over at Walt Disney World, it's a bit creepier though, thanks to the music room and the endless staircase. I think the music being played on the piano is pretty creepy, and the song gets louder and more ghostly as you pass through the endless staircase. I think this version's creepier than Disneyland's, but I still don't think it's the scariest. Over at Tokyo Disneyland, it's a lot scarier because it didn't get the 2007 updates that Walt Disney World got. This means it has the old attic that has the ghosts popping up trying to scare you, and the old bride that's a lot creepier than the one that we're stuck with at the American parks. It also doesn't have the changing portraits, but it does have creepier ones in my opinion, and I think that makes this ride a lot creepier than the US ones. Over at Disneyland Paris is a completely different story though, thanks to the Phantom. This ride is based on a phantom haunting the bride throughout the ride, but what really makes this ride scarier is the graveyard scene. It has a bunch of real-looking skeletons at the beginning of the graveyard, along with the creepy phantom who you can see up close pointing to an empty coffin and laughing. The Wild West graveyard scene is amazing and makes you forget about the phantom for a second, but then at the end of the graveyard scene, you can see the phantom laughing pointing to an empty coffin. Before 2019, the Phantom was rotting skin off and looked a lot creepier, but nonetheless, this version's definitely one of the creepiest. Next is Hong Kong Disneyland's Mystic Manor, and I'm just gonna say this, it's not creepy at all. Instead of focusing on scares, it talks about a house with artifacts that come to life and start moving. There's no ghosts on this ride because of Chinese beliefs, so that kind of makes it not really scary. But even though the ride's not very scary, it's still an amazing ride, and I definitely want to check it out myself. In terms of scares, Phantom Manor definitely takes the cake on this one, followed by Tokyo Disneyland, then Magic Kingdom, then Disneyland Anaheim, and lastly Mystic Manor. Now let's talk about the queues. So Disneyland's queue is pretty cool because you pass through like a pet cemetery, but the big problem with this one is that you just go back and forth for a long time. And then the port isn't really that interesting, so I think the queue for this ride's pretty boring and not the best. Over at Disney World, however, is a completely different story. Here there's a lot of things to do. Like you can tap on books and watch them like move, you can play instruments, you can tap on instruments, make them sound, you can like play the piano. There's just a ton to do here, and I definitely think this is one of the best, if not the best, queue Disney has ever made. So Tokyo Disneyland's queue is not as good as Magic Kingdom's queue, but then it's not as boring as Disneyland's queue. So Tokyo Disneyland actually gives really good views of the Haunted Mansion. You can see there's like a guest house, and also like the umbrellas and the tarps that cover you are like themed, and it just seems like a really cool themed place. And then there's also like an open crypt that I guess someone tried to escape through, since like there's a wall building up in it. It's just really cool, and while it's not as interactive and immersive as Magic Kingdoms, it definitely doesn't make for a bad queue. Now, unfortunately for Phantom Manor, it has a pretty boring queue. Like, there's some things to look at, like that guy in like a ticket booth, but like other than that, there's just really not much to do. It's just going back and forth. There's not much to look at, and it's just a pretty bad queue. But over at Hong Kong Disneyland, however, while not as immersive as Walt Disney World's queue, it still is really good, and it has a lot to offer. Like, there's a lot of artifacts that you can look at in there, and it just seems kind of like a cool place to be. So definitely not a bad queue, but I don't think it's the best. So in terms of queue, I can definitely say that Magic Kingdom wins this one, followed by Tokyo Disneyland, then Hong Kong Disneyland, then Phantom Manor, and unfortunately Disneyland loses this one. So now, since we finished our comparison, I'm just going to talk about how we'll be ranking each one. So the winner of each section will be getting 4 points, followed by the one that gets 3 points, which will be second place. Then third place will get 2 points. Then fourth place will get 1 point. Then last place will get 0. So Disneyland got 4 points for the exterior, 2 points for uniqueness, 1 point for the scares, and 0 points for the queue. So that puts it at 7 points. And then Magic Kingdom got 1 point for the exterior, 1 point for the uniqueness, 2 points for the scares, and 4 points for the queue. So that puts it at 8 points. So Tokyo Disneyland got 0 points for the exterior, 0 points for the uniqueness, 3 points for the scares, and 3 points for the queue. So that puts it right below Disneyland at 6 points. And then Phantom Manor got 3 points for the exterior, 3 points for the uniqueness, 4 points for the scares, and 1 point for the queue. So that puts it at 10 points. And then finally, Hong Kong's Mystic Manor got 2 points for the exterior, 4 points for the uniqueness, 0 points for the scares, and 2 points for the queue. So that puts it at 8 points, tied with Magic Kingdom. So overall, Phantom Manor won this comparison with 10 points, followed by Magic Kingdom and Hong Kong that got 8 points, followed by Disneyland, which got 7 points, followed by Tokyo Disneyland that got 6 points. So that does it for this video. If you liked it, please give this video a like, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.